Hello everyone, what's up? My name is Joe, and welcome back to my series, How to Paragon. This is the series where I teach you how to Paragon. I mean, if that's not obvious, then you might want to watch this video like 5 or 6 times, because, yeah, it's a little bit confusing this episode, because we're talking about the Shadowplane, otherwise known as invisibility for most other MOBAs. But let's just get right into it. So, as I just said, today's lesson is all about invisibility, or as it's known in Paragon, the Shadowplane. Unlike invisibility in most MOBAs, Paragon's invisibility mechanic isn't just disappearing or vanishing from sight. It's technically entering a new plane of existence called the Shadowplane. In League of Legends or Smite, if you go invisible, you can't be seen at all by the enemy, even if they go invisible, or in the case of League, if they have pink wards, or if you're under towers, enemy towers, which have true sight. In Paragon, instead of going invisible, you enter something called the Shadowplane. It's basically a plane of existence where anyone who is not in the Shadowplane can't see you because you are in the Shadowplane. Basically, things in the Shadowplane can only see other things in the Shadowplane. This is why Kallari's first ability is called Shadow Walk, and also it's why wards that turn invisible or vanish after being put down are called Shadow Wards. They enter the Shadowplane. Now, keeping in mind that in order to see something in the Shadowplane, you also need to be in the Shadowplane or have access to the Shadowplane. This is the same reason why Shadow Wards can see Kallari when she's invisible, as well as other Shadow Wards when they are also invisible or in the Shadowplane. In contrast to that, Kallari and other Shadow Wards can also see Shadow Wards that are in the Shadowplane. Also, the pools of light you see scattered around the map in Paragon, those are called shadow pads or shadow pools, whatever. Those are basically League of Legends bushes, except instead of hiding you from the enemy in a bush, you're hiding from the enemy in a shadow pool, which temporarily lets you into the Shadowplane, which means if you're at the Orb Prime Pit and those 2 shadow pads on the corners of it, if you are standing in one and the enemy is standing in the other, you will be able to see each other in the pads or pools, even though you're both technically in the Shadowplane / invisible. That's just a generalization of the Shadowplane. Let me go into a little more detail now about how it all works with each other. I'll start off with Shadow Wards. As we talked about in our last lesson, episode 1, if you haven't watched that, go watch it right now, it's really cool. Shadow Wards and Vision Wards can see everything in a radius around them, regardless of whether or not it's in or out of the Shadowplane, but that only applies to Shadow Wards. This means that if an enemy Kallari who used her Shadow Walk ability to enter the Shadowplane came within the range of that Shadow Ward, they would be spotted by the ward, and you and your team would be able to see Kallari. In contrast to that, as long as Kallari is in the Shadowplane with her Shadow Walk ability, she would also be able to see your Shadow Ward. However, if she tried to attack the Shadow Ward to get rid of it, she would be unable to do so because attacking automatically pulls her out of the Shadowplane, and she would no longer be able to see the ward and therefore be unable to damage the ward. However, her allies could also see what she sees while she's in the Shadowplane, and they could kill the ward for her as long as she's looking at it. This is the same effect that you see when you have a teammate standing in a shadow pad and there is a shadow ward placed by the enemy near the shadow pad. If they try to attack the ward from the shadow pad, the pad turns off or deactivates and they are no longer in the Shadowplane and the ward disappears, which is also why you need someone outside of the shadow pad, such as a teammate, to kill the ward for you. Of course, heroes with delayed abilities like Twin Blast's grenade or Sparrow's volley of arrows can be fired off before entering the shadow pad and then entering the shadow pad before the ability triggers any damage. You can also see an enemy Kallari by standing in the shadow pad if she's within, your line of sight. You won't be able to see her through walls or anything. You're not a ward, but wards can see over and through walls because that's what they do. Finally, there's a corruption card called Necroveil. It gives energy damage and energy penetration. It costs 6 points currently, and it has a very unique passive, one that on player kill turns your hero invisible or enters the Shadowplane for 3 seconds. This is a really good card to have on mages like Gideon because you can get a kill go invisible or enter the Shadowplane and reposition yourself for the next kill. But that's all there is to the Shadowplane and Paragon, guys. I hope this guide helped you. Hopefully now you understand a little bit more about how invisibility works. If you don't, like I said at the very beginning, try watching the video another time or a third time. It might help you understand, or just play around with it in-game yourself. Other than that, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. My name is Joe, and I'll see you guys later.